Hello, I'm Billy Langsworthy from Mojo Nation.
And I'm Deej Johnson. I'm a freelance creative consultant and writer, and in this video Billy and I are going to discuss three problems, count them, three problems that stop new inventors moving forward with their ideas and getting them to market. But keep watching, we're not just going to tell you the problems, we're also going to tell you what we think the solutions are. So now, Bill, you have interviewed over the course of your time at Mojo Nation dozens of inventors, I mean an astonishing array of great inventors, but you've also spoken to publishers and you've spoken to retailers. In your experience, what is it that stops an awful lot of new inventors getting to market with their games?
I think first off, it would be a lack of empathy, I think, is one of the key things. It's inventors not thinking about their end user. And the end user isn't just the people that are going to be playing your games. That's obviously what a lot of first-time inventors think of first. The end user in this case should also mean the companies you're pitching to, and also the retailers who eventually, in an ideal scenario, will be stocking your game. Because if you're creating some brilliant game that's massive and it comes in a huge box, or it comes in a box that's shaped like something fancy, it might be a great game, people might like it, people might like playing it, the company might think it's got potential, but you might get to the retail point of view and they will never have the capability to stock a game that is in this wacky shape.
Yes, which is difficult because increasingly people are trying to put their games, and I think it's quite right, in novelty packaging so it jumps off the shelf. But as a new inventor, I think that's a serious problem. That if you haven't empathized what that product is going to look like on a retail shelf, we've both had separately inventors come to us with games that are in huge boxes, absolutely not. They're like coffins, and they're going to bury the idea in those boxes. They simply aren't going to get onto the shelves at the entertainer. And you can go into the entertainer and see the restrictions of space in that respect. So that's a great example, empathizing with the retailer. Another one, you said about empathizing with the end user. So we had a game quite recently, we won't name names, it wouldn't be right, but we had a game it's out for sale, and I was about to say it's an all right game, but it's not, it's a terrible game, I won't lie. It's a terrible game, but it comes with dozens and dozens of little cardboard discs, and they're colour printed on both sides. But in order to set up the game, they all have to be the right way up. Now, what you and I experienced was it just took so long to set that game up that it literally took longer to fiddle around and get them all the right way up than it did to play the game. I struggle to picture a parent playing that game and then recommending it. If it took longer to play it than it did, longer to set it up than it did to play it, that would not be something that I would say showed empathy.
No, and it's about expectation as well. If you've created a tabletop game that is going to take a few hours to play, then absolutely that end user is going to expect a certain amount of setup time. In this case, you know, a family game that was pitched as being, you know, a 15-20 minute game, if it's taking a long time, especially a family game that's going to be kids, you know, maybe lose patience before you've even set the game up. Yeah. Those sort of things you've absolutely got to consider.
There's also the capacity, I think, to empathise with a brand. I mean, at the moment we've sort of spoken there about emphasising the end user and their expectations, but a brand doesn't really have an expectation. You have a responsibility to work out what a brand's needs are. And a good example of that, again, is John Lewis. If you take a game that's too rude to John Lewis, as a good example, then they wouldn't necessarily want to stock anything that's too near the knuckle. So you have to empathise with what John Lewis wants to stock. That's not to do with your game, which is why the game might not get anywhere. But this is dangerously close to the next thing, because as well as having empathy or lacking empathy, I think something else that new inventors struggle to do is enough research, not enough research. And there are three areas that I think need researching in terms of new inventors. It's the concept itself, it's the market, and it's the companies to whom they're trying to pitch the game. But let's do that in order. First of all, there is certainly a lack of research in terms of the concept. And I'm only laughing, Bill, because I know you've had terrible experiences where people have called you up on Skype and said, I've got a great idea for a game. We've been playing it in the family for years. It's marvellous. And then they've effectively walked you through charades.
Yeah.
Do I exaggerate?
No, no. It happens, or it's exact replicas of other games. And it's the thing of, you know, research is massive, and you've got to make sure, A, that your game hasn't already been done, and B, if it hasn't been done, maybe look at why it hasn't been done. If you've got a game which teaches the highway code, for example, on big cards that literally spells it out, and that's the crux of your game, just saying, well, look, there's no other games out there about the highway code. Yeah. There probably is a reason why. It might be because the game isn't great. Yeah. And I think that's the key. And it's not always a red flag. It's not always a sign to panic if something about your game is already out there, because there are lots of games. Sally Jacobs from Uber, in the book, we spoke to her, and she coins the term one step new. And that's the thing. There are a lot of games which are a bit like this game, a bit like this game, and together it's a new idea.
Who's the dude? Charades with a rubber doll.
Exactly, and there's lots of games that you see pitched as it's Jenga meets this. Beats of Balance is Jenga with a digital twist. So there are lots and lots and lots and lots of games. You know, Pie Face is Russian roulette with whipped cream. There are lots of games which are amalgamations of other things. So that's not a bad thing in this industry. If you see something about your game somewhere else, you don't have to put it away and bin the idea. It's just worth developing the idea more and seeing if there are other fresh angles you can bring into the mix.
Which kind of ties in with the second type of research, which is market research. Now, I've had a lot of unfortunate experiences with inventors who have come and said, I've got an idea for a game, and they, for some reason, have identified a large number of people as though that will qualify as a market. So the example I always say, you know, there are 500,000 people in this country who eat kippers for breakfast, and yet there's no game aimed at them. But just finding a large number of people doesn't mean you found a market for a game. I'm never quite sure how they've how they've disconnected those two things. There's no connection at all. This is the herring-based game you've been waiting for. But that isn't what I would consider market research. Market research, I think, means looking at what is selling well, anticipating, if possible, what trends are upcoming, because what is selling well may not sell well in the future. But there is a whole area there of investigating what the market is hungry for, and you've spoken about this several times.
Yeah, it's the thing of, we meet a lot of designers who, when they're designing their first game, they're designing based on what they used to play and when they were kids. So they might have created a game based on games they played in the 80s, and it's maybe a big board and it's dice and it's get to the end type things, and there is still a place for that now, but games have moved on, especially mass market games. And I think by just going to a toy shop, by going to the Entertainer or John Lewis or somewhere and seeing what games are on shelves, you can see what sort of games are hot. And there are so many different types. If you look at the success of Pie Face, has led to loads of games now which are very silly and fun, and you're very interactive, and they don't have a board, and you almost wear the game sometimes.
It's a very toy-like feel to a lot of games at this point in time.
And I think if you're in a silo and you're just inventing based on what you remember, and you're not going out there and you're not going to board game clubs and going to shops and seeing all these other fun, great sort of games, then when it comes to pitching your idea and putting it in front of people, it might seem a little bit old-fashioned if it's just that old style game. And I think that's where, going to the Entertainer and just seeing, asking them what's your best-selling game this week, what's been doing really well, what hasn't been doing very well. You can sort of get a handle on the sorts of products that you should be aiming for.
Yeah, to sort of mind the cold face and get away from your actual game and find out how that game may or may not fit the market itself. Which actually, and something you said there about going to the Entertainer, and we touched on it a little bit earlier with John Lewis, because we said about a game that was too rude for John Lewis, and that's another good example. The third type of research is to research the companies to whom you hope to pitch this, or that you would ideally want to have stock it. If you've come up with a very dirty game, John Lewis probably won't touch it. We also had a couple of times inventors have come up with ideas and there's an element of magic in the game, and they haven't considered for a moment that with the Entertainer, founder of the Entertainer being quite a religious guy, he probably wouldn't allow that in his store because it's blasphemous. And indeed, if you had things like, I don't know whether they would say just saying "oh my God" is blasphemy, but if you have that written on a card, I would have to be sure that would be not a problem in order to do that. And the only way to be sure would be to do research on the companies to whom you're planning to take the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And it will give your game the better chance of success as well, in terms of, if you've got a game which involves money and property, for example, even if it's not a board game. I'll give you an example. There's a game called Monopoly Cash Grab, which is basically a gun that fires off notes, and it's like Monopoly meets the Crystal Maze. You're grabbing notes.
Yeah.
Now that game, if you strip away the Monopoly branding, still a game, and it probably existed in the early days as its own thing. Yeah. But that by having the Monopoly brand, and by them thinking about that being a good fit for the Monopoly brand, it made it a much simpler pitch.
Yes.
When they got in front of Hasbro, I'd imagine. And in the same way, if you've got an idea for a blaster, a toy blaster that fires 5 times bigger than Nerf, you might want to think about actually going to Hasbro and pitching it as their next big Nerf product.
Yes, rather than coming up and saying, I've got this game that's based on grabbing money and I'm trying to launch a whole thing. That makes much more sense to make that a monopoly thing. That I can say, absolutely, I think that's absolutely right. So we've talked about lacking empathy being a serious problem, and we talked about not doing enough research being a problem. And what you're talking about there in terms of really sort of, it's combining the needs of other people through empathy and research with your idea, and that kind of relates to the last and what I think is the biggest problem that new inventors have. And in just a second, we're not only going to talk about that, the number one thing that will help you take that game to the next level, but also what the solutions are. Before I do that, I should say to find out more about research and to find out more about empathy, and indeed to find out how to have lots and lots of ideas and lots of other subjects, then do take a look at our book, The Snakes and Ladders of Creative Thinking. It will tell you not only how to have more ideas for games, but also how to improve them and get them ready to pitch. But then what you were just saying about taking one idea and combining it with another, that's dangerously close to the biggest problem, because for sure, the biggest problem in our experience is that most new inventors have got just one idea and they're putting everything on it.
Absolutely, and there's loads of things wrong with that. It breeds lots of problems. One is that it's very easy for a designer to become wed to that one idea, which then makes any criticism or any feedback or changes or any negative responses can feel personal rather than just, well, it's just one of several ideas and you've got other options.
Yeah.
The other as well is, if you look at just if you look realistically at how games are licensed, there are lots of brilliant professional toy and game studios and toy and game freelance designers out there. You know, they will pitch 10, 15 ideas at a time when they get into these situations with companies, and sometimes none of those will get picked up. And if you're thinking the professionals, their hit rate, is quite slim. The idea that you're going to create a game, walk in and it's going to be perfect, it is slim. It does happen. Yeah. It does happen, but you'll have a better chance if you've got lots of game ideas and lots of people to pitch it to. And the last thing on that I'd quickly say is it also from a perspective point of view is that the company, if you go in there with lots of ideas to a company, you pitch lots of ideas, none of them work, and none of them get licensed, the company will at least see you as a bit of an ideas machine. And they'll think, well, none of Deej's ideas were a good fit, but we know Deej has got lots of ideas, so we'll definitely want him to come back and pitch to us again, because he's clearly an ideas machine.
It's a bad example, use my name.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, I think, they won't mind seeing you again. If you rock up and you've got your game about the highway code, they say no. Next year they see you again. You've got your game about the highway code, but it's a slightly different, still a no. You might get a reputation as that guy with that game, and he's been plugging it for years.
For sure. No, I think that's absolutely right. I was just thinking that something you did say there that was a very small point is that sometimes you do get people who do get lucky, and I think that perpetuates the myth that it is easy. So I say get lucky. You know, Bananagrams is a great example. The sock game is a great example. Arguably, they look on the surface like they're one idea, and that creates the impression that somehow they've got to market, and it's, you know, pow, I'm there. But actually, Bananagrams is my favourite example. It's three ideas. One, the gameplay is phenomenal. It's an absolutely terrific, solid, brilliantly thought through game. It is terrific. Would that game necessarily, we've discussed this, so I don't know the answer, would the game have got to market if it was just that one idea? I'm not absolutely sure. Certainly, I think it helps that it comes in the Bananagrams pouch, in that banana-shaped pouch. That has helped no end. And of course, the third idea there is the game name, which cinches those two things together. So there are three ideas for Bananagrams. But the point that would be absolutely relevant is if you've gone to pitch an idea to a games company and they've looked at it and, yeah, you know, this is not for us. This is not our cup of tea. I don't know who this is that I'm doing. It's not for us. But what else have you got? That's a 20-minute pitch wasted if the answer is nothing. I've got it all riding on this.
Yeah, and I think if you're already of that mindset where you're not precious about your ideas and you've got lots of ideas, it's different. If you're going down the self-publishing route, it's slightly different. But if you are looking to license your game to a company, the chance that even if you get a licensing deal, there will be that collaboration. The company will work with you on what becomes the final game. Even the sock game, there are differences from that original game to what it is now.
Yeah.
So you have to be you have to have that flexibility. You have to be open to there being changes. And I think if you've got lots of ideas and you're not precious, it makes that whole process a million times easier.
Yep, I think that's absolutely right. Okay, so they are our 3 top tips. We hope they help. Please remember to leave feedback and comments for this video. We appreciate the feedback, do we not? Yeah, we do. Apparently. We appreciate the feedback, so please do give us a thumbs up on the video if you realise how these tips can help you.